The envelope arrived on a Tuesday morning, cream-colored and heavy, the kind of paper that whispered wealth before fingers even touched it. Lyra stood in the small kitchen of her downtown Chicago apartment, coffee forgotten on the counter, staring at the embossed lettering that spelled out her name with deliberate formality. The return address made her stomach tighten. The Valen estate in the Gold Coast, where glass towers met old money and power wore tailored suits like armor. She had not heard that name in 3 years. 3 years since she walked away from the world that had chewed her up and spit her out. 3 years since she stopped checking her reflection for signs of the girl who once believed love could bridge impossible distances. The girl who thought Cale Valen, heir to one of Chicago's most influential investment dynasties, could choose her over the legacy carved into his last name. Lyra set the envelope down, her fingers trembling slightly. Outside, the November wind rattled the windows of her modest studio, a sharp contrast to the heated marble floors she once walked in Cale's penthouse. She had built this life brick by brick, working double shifts at the community center in Pilsen, teaching English to immigrant families, volunteering at the food bank on weekends. It was honest work, purposeful, and it had slowly stitched together the parts of her the Valen family had torn apart. But the envelope sat there, patient and poisonous. She opened it because not knowing felt worse than knowing. The invitation unfolded like a threat dressed in calligraphy. Cale Valen and Serafina Ashford request the honor of your presence at their union, to be celebrated at the Valen Grand Estate, December 15th. Black tie required. The words blurred. Serafina Ashford, daughter of a media empire, perfect in every way Lyra had been told she was not. Blonde where Lyra was dark, educated at Yale where Lyra had community college, connected where Lyra had been alone. The invitation included a handwritten note in Cale's precise script. I thought you should see how far I've come. I hope you can attend and celebrate with us. It would mean a great deal. Lyra read it 3 times, each word a calculated cruelty. This was not an olive branch. This was a victory lap. Kyle wanted her there to complete his narrative, to show everyone who had whispered about his brief, inexplicable engagement to a nobody that he had corrected course, that he had chosen correctly in the end. She would be the shadow in the corner, proof of his ascension and her irrelevance. Her phone buzzed. A text from Maya, her roommate and closest friend since the collapse. You okay? You've been staring at that envelope for 20 minutes. Lyra glanced toward the doorway where Maya stood, concern etched across her face. She worked nights as a nurse at Northwestern Memorial, and her ability to read distress was professional and personal. Lyra handed her the invitation without speaking. Maya's expression darkened as she read. Then she looked up, eyes fierce. You're not going. I don't know, Lyra heard herself say. Lyra, he destroyed you. We spent months picking up pieces. You don't owe him anything, especially not the satisfaction of seeing you diminished. Lyra walked to the window, looking out at the gray Chicago skyline, the lake a sheet of steel in the distance. She remembered the last time she saw Cale, 2 days before what was supposed to be their engagement announcement. His mother had summoned her to the Valen offices, a fortress of glass and marble on Wacker Drive. The conversation had been surgical. You are not suitable. You do not understand our world. Cale's future requires someone who can navigate our circles, someone whose family name opens doors rather than raises eyebrows. We are prepared to compensate you for your discretion. Lyra had refused the money. She had walked out with her dignity, or what remained of it, and Cale had let her go without a fight. He had texted once, a week later, I'm sorry it had to be this way, as if their love had been an inconvenience, rather than the center of her universe. What if I want to go? Lyra said quietly. Maya moved beside her. Then I'm worried about you. Lyra turned to face her friend. I rebuilt myself, Maya. I survived. Maybe I need to walk back into that world and prove I'm not the broken girl they discarded. And if it breaks you again? It won't, Lyra said, though her voice wavered. Because I'm not going alone. Maya frowned. What do you mean? Lyra had not told anyone, not even Maya, about the letter that arrived 6 months ago. It had come from a lawyer's office in New York, elegant and cryptic, requesting a meeting to discuss matters pertaining to her late mother's estate. Lyra's mother, Elena, had died when Lyra was 12, and there had been no estate, only debts and faded photographs. But curiosity and a thread of desperate hope had pulled her to that Manhattan office. What she learned there unraveled everything she thought she knew. Her mother had not been nobody. Elena had been connected to one of the oldest and most discreet power networks in the country, families whose influence shaped policy and economies from shadows. She had walked away from that world to marry Lyra's father, a choice that had cost her everything when he died and left them with nothing. But Elena had kept one connection, one friend, who had promised to watch over her daughter if anything happened. That friend was Dominic Kane. Dominic was not a name spoken lightly. At 52, he controlled a private equity empire that spanned continents, his reputation built on ruthless intelligence and an uncanny ability to see 10 moves ahead. He was also, by the archaic and whispered standards of the old families, considered an alpha king, a title that meant less about supernatural hierarchy and more about unquestioned authority, someone whose word could destroy or elevate with equal ease. He had never married, never had children, and his presence at any event shifted the entire room's gravity. And he had promised Elena he would protect Lyra. When Lyra met him in that Manhattan office, she had expected coldness. Instead, Dominic had looked at her with something like regret. He told her about her mother's past, about the sacrifices Elena made, about the life Lyra could have had if circumstances were different. He offered her nothing material, only a question. If you ever need me, will you ask? Lyra had left that office uncertain, carrying the knowledge like a stone. But now, staring at Cale's invitation, the stone became a weapon. She pulled out her phone and found Dominic's number, saved under a single initial. Her thumb hovered over the call button. This would change everything. If she walked into Cale's wedding with Dominic Kane, it would not be quiet. It would be a statement that rippled through every elite circle in the country. She pressed call. He answered on the second ring, his voice low and measured. Lyra. I need to ask, she said, heart pounding. There was a pause then. Tell me what you need. The days between the phone call and the wedding stretched like a held breath. Lyra went through her routines with a strange clarity, teaching her students, organizing donation drives, but everything felt suspended, as if she were moving underwater. She did not tell Maya about Dominic, not yet. The decision felt too large, too fragile, to speak aloud. Dominic had been characteristically efficient. He sent a car to bring her to his Chicago residence, a converted historic mansion in Lincoln Park that managed to be both grand and invisible, tucked behind gates and old-growth trees. When Lyra arrived, he greeted her himself, dressed casually in dark slacks and a sweater, looking nothing like the titan whose name made CEOs nervous. "Thank you for coming," he said, guiding her to a sitting room with floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking a private garden blanketed in early snow. Lyra sat, hands folded in her lap. "I don't know if this is the right thing to do." Dominic settled across from her, his gaze direct but not unkind. "Tell me about Cale Valen." So she did. She told him about meeting Cale at a charity gala where she had been working coat check to make extra money during college. How Cale had noticed her, pursued her with a single-minded intensity that felt like fate. How for 8 months, she believed they were building something real, something that transcended the obvious gap between their worlds. She told him about Cale's mother, the meeting, the ultimatum, the way Cale had chosen silence over her. "He wants me there to complete his story," Lyra finished, voice steady despite the ache. The poor girl he briefly lost his mind over, proof that he came to his senses. Dominic listened without interruption, his expression unreadable. When she finished, he was quiet for a long moment, then said, "Your mother faced a similar choice once. She chose love over power, and it cost her dearly. But she never regretted it, because she chose authentically." "I'm not choosing love," Lyra said. "I'm choosing not to hide." "Then you're choosing power," Dominic replied. "And you should understand what that means. If you walk into that wedding with me, you will not be invisible. The Valen family will see it as an attack. Cale will understand immediately that you are not the girl he discarded. Others will speculate, will dig into your past, will question how you earned my protection. It will be uncomfortable." "I've been uncomfortable for 3 years," Lyra said. "At least this time I'll choose it." Dominic nodded slowly. "Then we do this correctly. You will need the right dress, the right presentation. Not to impress them, but to make clear you are not performing for their approval. You are simply yourself, and that is enough." Over the next 2 weeks, Lyra was pulled into a world she had only glimpsed from the margins. Dominic's assistant, a sharp-eyed woman named Claire, coordinated everything with military precision. Lyra was fitted for a gown, midnight blue silk that moved like water, elegant without trying too hard. Her hair was styled simply, her makeup understated. The goal was not transformation, but revelation, showing what had always been there beneath the doubt Cale's family had planted. Maya finally extracted the truth one evening, when she found Lyra practicing walking in heels. Her reaction was explosive disbelief, followed by fierce pride. "You're going with Dominic Kane? Lyra, do you understand what this means? Cale is going to lose his mind." "That's not why I'm doing this," Lyra insisted. "I know," Maya said, grinning. "But it's going to be a nice bonus." The night before the wedding, Lyra could not sleep. She stood at her window, watching snow fall over the city, and allowed herself to remember. She remembered Cale's laugh, the way he used to trace patterns on her skin while they talked about futures that felt possible. She remembered believing she could be enough, that love was the great equalizer. She had been so painfully young. But she also remembered the strength it took to walk away. The nights she cried herself to sleep. The mornings she forced herself out of bed because staying under the covers felt like surrender. The slow, agonizing work of rebuilding a sense of self that did not depend on being chosen by someone who saw her as a risk to manage. She was not that girl anymore, and tomorrow she would prove it. Dominic picked her up at noon. The car was understated, black and sleek, the kind that did not announce itself, but was immediately recognized by those who knew. He wore a charcoal suit that fit like it was part of him, his silver hair impeccably styled, his presence radiating controlled authority. When Lyra stepped into the car, he looked at her approvingly. "You look like your mother," he said quietly. She had that same fire in her eyes when she knew she was walking into battle. "Was she scared?" Lyra asked. "Terrified," Dominic admitted. But she went anyway. Courage is not the absence of fear, Lyra. It is the decision to move forward despite it. The drive to the Valen estate took 40 minutes, winding through neighborhoods where wealth was architectural legacy, where gates concealed sprawling grounds and history was a commodity. Lyra's heart hammered as they approached, the estate emerging like something from a Gilded Age fever dream, all stone and glass and impossible proportions. Cars lined the circular drive, valets in crisp uniforms directing traffic. Guests in furs and designer labels moved toward the entrance, their laughter carrying on the cold air. Lyra recognized faces from magazines, from news broadcasts, the kind of people whose names were synonymous with influence. When their car pulled up, a valet opened the door. Dominic stepped out first, and Lyra watched heads turn, conversations pause. Then he extended his hand to her, and she took it, stepping onto the stone driveway in her midnight blue gown. The silence was immediate and absolute. Lyra lifted her chin, meeting the stares with calm she did not entirely feel. Beside her, Dominic's expression was neutral, but his hand on the small of her back was steady, grounding. They walked toward the entrance, and the crowd parted like water, whispers rising in their wake. Inside the grand foyer, beneath chandeliers that cost more than most homes, Kyle stood greeting guests. He wore a white tuxedo, looking every inch the prince of this golden kingdom. Serafina radiant beside him in a dress that probably had its own security detail. And then he saw Lyra. His smile froze. His eyes widened, moving from her face to Dominic's, and Lyra watched the color drain from his features. Serafina noticed immediately, following his gaze, her own expression shifting from confusion to sharp alertness. Dominic guided Lyra forward, and the crowd seemed to hold its breath. When they reached Kale, Dominic extended his hand with perfect, devastating courtesy. "Congratulations on your wedding," Dominic said, his voice carrying just enough edge to make it clear this was not a simple pleasantry. "Lyra spoke so fondly of her time with your family. I thought it only right to ensure she could attend." Kale's hand trembled slightly as he shook Dominic's. His eyes found Lyra's, searching, disbelieving. "Lyra, I didn't think you'd come." "You invited me," Lyra said simply, her voice calm. "It would have been rude to decline." Serafina stepped forward, her smile polished and brittle. "How wonderful that you could make it. And Mr. Kane, what an unexpected honor." The word unexpected hung in the air like an accusation. Lyra could see the calculations behind Serafina's eyes, the immediate assessment of threat and social implications. This was not how the day was supposed to unfold. "Shall we find our seats?" Dominic suggested smoothly, guiding Lyra away before the moment could stretch into something more volatile. As they walked deeper into the estate, toward the grand ballroom where the ceremony would take place, Lyra felt eyes following them, felt the weight of 100 unspoken questions. She did not look back at Kale. She was done looking back. If you're enjoying this story so far, don't forget to subscribe to our channel to make sure you don't miss the next chapters. And let us know in the comments which moment has captured your attention the most. Your support means everything. The ballroom was a cathedral of wealth, all soaring ceilings and marble columns. Winter light filtering through massive arched windows that overlooked manicured gardens now dusted with snow. White roses climbed every surface, their perfume almost overwhelming, and gold accents caught the light with aggressive shimmer. 200 chairs upholstered in ivory silk faced an altar draped in more flowers, more excess, more proof that the Valen family did nothing quietly. Dominic guided Lyra to seats near the middle, a deliberate choice. Not front row, which would have been provocative, but not hidden in back either. Visible, undeniable. As they settled, Lyra felt the weight of stares, heard the rustle of whispers that spread like wildfire through the assembled elite. Women leaned toward their companions. Men pulled out phones to text contacts. And somewhere in the front rows, Lyra knew Cale's mother was receiving urgent updates about the complication that had just walked through her carefully orchestrated event. Dominic sat with the ease of someone accustomed to being watched, his posture relaxed, but his eyes alert, taking in everything. He leaned slightly toward Lyra and said quietly, "Breathe. You are exactly where you are supposed to be." Lyra inhaled slowly, focusing on the cool air filling her lungs, on the solid reality of the chair beneath her, on the fact that she had chosen this. Around them, Chicago's elite continued to file in, each entrance a performance. She recognized tech moguls, political dynasties, old money families whose wealth predated the city itself. These were the people who had looked through her like glass when she was with Kyle, who had made clear through silent glances and careful distance that she was temporary, forgettable. Now they could not look away. The ceremony began with orchestral music that seemed designed to intimidate with its grandeur. A string quartet positioned near the altar launched into something classical and heavy, all drama and inevitability. The officiant, a silver-haired man whose face suggested he married billionaires with the same enthusiasm as Sunday brunch, took his position. Then the procession started. Bridesmaids in blush pink, groomsmen in matching tuxedos, a flower girl scattering petals with practiced precision. And then Serafina appeared. She moved down the aisle on her father's arm, looking like she had been designed specifically for this moment. Her dress was a masterpiece of lace and crystal beading, her veil trailing behind her like a claim to territory, her smile radiant and calculated in equal measure. Cameras flashed, guests murmured approval, and Serafina's gaze swept the room with the confidence of someone who had never doubted her place in it. Until her eyes landed on Lyra. The hesitation was brief, barely a heartbeat, but Lyra caught it. Saw the flicker of something, uncertainty or threat assessment, before Serafina's smile locked back into place, and she continued forward. When she reached the altar, Cale took her hand, but his eyes drifted past his bride's shoulder, finding Lyra in the crowd. The officiant began speaking about love and commitment, about two families joining, about legacy and future. The words washed over Lyra like white noise. She was too aware of her own heartbeat, too conscious of Dominic's steady presence beside her, too focused on the surreal reality that she was watching the man she once loved promise forever to someone else. But the pain she expected did not come. Instead, she felt something like detachment, as if she were watching a play she had no stake in. This version of Kyle, standing in his white tuxedo beneath ridiculous floral arrangements, felt like a stranger. The Kyle she had loved had laughed at pretension, had met her in diners at midnight, had talked about building something different from his family's empire. That Kyle, she realized, had probably never existed. He had been a role he played, a brief rebellion before inevitably conforming to expectation. The vows were traditional, expensive sounding without saying much. Cale promised to honor and cherish, his voice steady, trained for boardrooms and speeches. Serafina's vows were similar, polished and appropriate. When they exchanged rings, the diamonds caught light with almost violent brilliance. "You may kiss the bride," the officiant intoned. Kyle kissed Serafina, and the room erupted in applause. But even as he pulled back, even as he smiled at his new wife, his eyes found Lyra again. There was something desperate in that look, something that made Lyra's stomach tighten. Regret, maybe, or realization. But it was too late, and they both knew it. The recessional music swelled, and the newly married couple walked back down the aisle, Serafina waving graciously, Cale's smile not quite reaching his eyes. As they passed Lyra's row, Serafina's gaze locked onto her, sharp and assessing. No longer the confident bride, but something harder, more calculating. Lyra met that gaze evenly, neither challenging nor retreating. Dominic stood, offering his hand to help Lyra rise. As guests began filtering toward the reception hall, he said quietly, "The ceremony is the easy part. What comes next will require more from you." "I know," Lyra said. The reception hall was even more extravagant than the ceremony space, all gold and crystal in excess that bordered on obscene. A live band set up on a raised stage, their equipment worth more than Lyra's annual salary. Bars stationed at every corner, bartenders in crisp uniforms ready to pour top-shelf liquor. Servers circulated with trays of hors d'oeuvres that were works of art, tiny and expensive and designed to barely satisfy. Name cards guided guests to assigned tables. Lyra found hers with a jolt of cruel clarity. She and Dominic were seated at a table with Cale's college friends, people who had been friendly to her face when she was with Cale, but who had ghosted her completely after the breakup. The placement was deliberate, a way to isolate her among people who had made clear she did not belong. But Dominic's presence changed the equation entirely. When they approached the table, the already seated guests, including a venture capitalist named Marcus and his wife Brittany, stood immediately, expressions shifting from casual boredom to acute attention. "Mr. Kane," Marcus stammered slightly, "this is unexpected. We had no idea you would be attending." "Last-minute decision," Dominic said smoothly, pulling out Lyra's chair before taking his own. "Lyra is a dear friend, and when she mentioned the wedding, I thought it would be a lovely opportunity to see Chicago society in full form." The weight of that statement settled over the table. "Dear friend" from Dominic Kane's mouth was not casual. It was a declaration, a warning, a complete recontextualization of who Lyra was and what it meant to cross her. Brittany's eyes widened, and Lyra could practically see her mentally rewriting every dismissive interaction they had ever had. Dinner was announced, and servers materialized with plated courses that were meant to impress. Lyra ate mechanically, aware that conversations around them had shifted, that people were being more careful with their words, more mindful of the power dynamic that Dominic's presence enforced. Across the room, at the head table elevated like a throne, Cale sat beside Serafina, his mother on his other side. Eleanor Valenne was a woman who wore control like jewelry, her silver hair styled in a severe bob, her designer gown making clear that she set standards rather than followed them. Lyra had met her exactly 3 times, each encounter a masterclass in polite destruction. Eleanor had never raised her voice, never been overtly cruel, but her message had been crystal clear. You are not enough, will never be enough, and your presence here is a temporary inconvenience. Now, Eleanor's gaze found Lyra across the room, and even from a distance, Lyra could see the sharp displeasure, the calculation behind those cold eyes. Eleanor leaned toward Kyle, said something that made his jaw tighten, then stood gracefully, and began making her way through the room, stopping at tables to greet guests with the ease of a practiced politician. Dominic noticed her trajectory. "She's coming," he said calmly. "Remember what I told you. You owe her nothing. Not explanations, not apologies, not deference." Lyra's hands tightened on her napkin under the table. But when Eleanor Valen arrived at their table, Lyra's face was composed. Eleanor's smile was a knife wrapped in silk. "Lyra, what a surprise. I had no idea you were planning to attend," Eleanor said, her tone suggesting this was a pleasant error rather than a calculated move. Then her eyes moved to Dominic, and something flickered in her expression. Respect or wariness, Lyra could not tell. "Mr. Kane, I don't believe we've been formally introduced, though of course I know your reputation." Dominic stood, ever the gentleman, and extended his hand. "Mrs. Valen, congratulations on your son's marriage. It is a beautiful celebration." "You are too kind," Eleanor replied, shaking his hand briefly. Her eyes returned to Lyra, assessing. "I must admit, I am curious how you two know each other. It is such an unexpected pairing." The implication was clear. Lyra was not important enough to merit Dominic Kane's attention. Dominic's expression did not change. But his voice carried an edge when he replied, "Lyra's mother, Elena, was a cherished friend. I made a promise many years ago, and I honor my commitments. I suspect you understand the value of that, Mrs. Valen." Eleanor's smile tightened almost imperceptibly. "Of course. Family connections are everything." She turned back to Lyra, and for a moment, her mask slipped enough to show genuine irritation. "I hope you enjoy the evening. It is such a special day for Kyle and Serafina." "I'm sure it is," Lyra said evenly. Eleanor departed, her posture rigid, and Lyra released a breath she had not realized she was holding. Dominic settled back into his seat, a hint of satisfaction in his eyes. "Well done," he said quietly. The evening progressed with speeches, toasts that praised Kale and Serafina with rehearsed enthusiasm, each speaker trying to outdo the last with eloquence and flattery. Kale's best man told stories about their college days that were carefully edited for public consumption. Serafina's maid of honor waxed poetic about true love and perfect matches. Through it all, Lyra felt Kale's eyes on her. Every time she glanced toward the head table, he was looking her way, his expression unreadable. Serafina noticed, her smiles growing tighter, her hand on Kale's arm more possessive. When the dancing began, Dominic offered his hand. "May I?" Lyra hesitated, then nodded. He led her to the dance floor as the band launched into something slow and romantic. Other couples joined, but space seemed to clear around them, as if even the wealthy instinctively gave Dominic Kane room to move. "You are doing remarkably well," Dominic said as they swayed to the music. "I don't feel remarkable," Lyra admitted. "I feel like I'm barely holding it together." "That is the definition of courage," Dominic replied. "Holding together when everything in you wants to fall apart." As the song continued, Lyra became aware of movement at the edge of the dance floor. Kyle had stood, leaving Serafina at the table despite her clear displeasure. He was moving toward them, purpose in his stride, and Lyra's heart kicked against her ribs. When Kale reached them, he stopped, looking between Lyra and Dominic with barely contained emotion. "May I cut in?" And it was not really a question. It was a demand wrapped in social nicety. Dominic looked at Lyra, leaving the choice to her. The entire ballroom seemed to pause, waiting. Lyra met Kale's eyes, seeing everything she had once loved and everything that had destroyed her, and said clearly, "No." The single word landed like a stone in still water. Kale's face flushed, his eyes widening with shock and something that looked like pain. "Lyra, please." I just want to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," Lyra said, her voice steady. "You made your choice 3 years ago. This is mine." She turned back to Dominic, who resumed their dance without missing a beat, guiding her away from Cale's frozen form. Over Dominic's shoulder, Lyra saw Serafina rise from the head table, saw Eleanor Vallen's face tighten with fury, saw the guests closest to the scene pull out phones to capture or text about the drama unfolding, and Lyra realized that she had just done something she had never been able to do before. She had said no to Cale Valen and meant it. The rejection on the dance floor rippled through the reception like a shockwave barely contained by good breeding and expensive champagne. Guests whispered behind hands, eyes tracking Lyra and Dominic as they finished their dance with calm dignity, then tracking Kyle as he stood frozen for 3 painful seconds, before retreating to the head table where Serafina waited, with a smile that did not reach her eyes. The bride leaned close to her new husband, speaking words too quiet for others to hear, but her posture was rigid, her hand on his arm less affectionate than restraining. Dominic guided Lyra off the dance floor and toward one of the balconies that overlooked the estate's winter gardens. The glass doors were open despite the December cold, a few guests braving the temperature to smoke cigars or escape the intensity of the celebration. Dominic found a quiet corner, and Lyra gripped the marble railing, breathing in air that tasted like snow and freedom. "That was harder than I expected," she admitted, her voice low. "You were perfect," Dominic said, "but I suspect it is about to get more complicated." He was right. Within minutes, a server appeared with a message. Mrs. Eleanor Valen requested Lyra's presence in the estate's private study for a brief conversation. The phrasing was courteous, but the request was not optional. Dominic's expression darkened. "You do not have to go," he said firmly. "I know," Lyra replied, "but I want to." She had spent 3 years avoiding this confrontation, 3 years building a life where Eleanor Valen's opinion did not matter. But standing here, in the heart of the world that had rejected her, Lyra realized she wanted to face the woman who had dismantled her future with such cold efficiency. Not for closure, exactly, but for proof that she could stand in Eleanor's presence and not crumble. "Then I am coming with you," Dominic stated. The study was on the 2nd floor, reached by a grand staircase lined with family portraits that traced the Valen lineage back generations. Each face looked similar, patrician features and confident gazes, people who had never questioned their right to occupy space and wield power. The study itself was all dark wood and leather, shelves lined with first editions and awards, a massive desk positioned to dominate the room. Eleanor stood by the window when they entered, her posture perfect, her expression controlled. She turned as they approached, and her eyes narrowed slightly at Dominic's presence. "I had hoped to speak with Lyra privately," Eleanor said. "And I had hoped to never see your son again," Lyra replied evenly. "I suppose we are both disappointed." Eleanor's lips thinned. "You have made quite the spectacle this evening. I assume that was your intention?" "My intention was to accept your son's invitation," Lyra said. "Everything else is a consequence of choices you and Cale made 3 years ago." "We protected him," Eleanor shot back, the first crack in her composure. "You were a distraction, a phase. Cale was infatuated with the idea of rebellion, of slumming it with someone outside our world. I did what any mother would do. I ensured he did not throw away his future on a fleeting mistake. The words were meant to cut, and 3 years ago, they would have eviscerated Lyra. But time and pain had built armor, and Lyra found herself strangely unmoved by Eleanor's venom. Instead, she felt a kind of clarity, seeing the older woman not as an insurmountable obstacle, but as someone desperately clinging to control. She was losing. "You did not protect Kyle," Lyra said quietly. "You made him a coward. You taught him that love is less important than appearances, that people are disposable if they do not fit the right aesthetic. And now he is married to someone he does not love, standing in a room full of people who are here for the show, not the commitment. If that is success, you are welcome to it." Eleanor's face flushed with anger, but before she could respond, Dominic spoke for the first time since entering the room. His voice was calm, almost conversational, but it carried the weight of someone accustomed to being obeyed. "Mrs. Valen, I think you misunderstand the situation. Lyra is not here to disrupt your son's wedding or to beg for a second chance. She is here because she has every right to be, and because I stand with her. You may have considerable influence in certain circles, but I suggest you consider carefully before making an enemy of me over something as petty as outdated class prejudice." Eleanor stiffened. "Are you threatening me, Mr. Kane?" "I am stating facts," Dominic replied. "You built your family's reputation on strategic alliances and careful image management. Imagine how quickly that reputation crumbles if people learn that you not only rejected a young woman for her economic background, but then invited her to your son's wedding specifically to humiliate her further. The narrative, I think, would not reflect well on the Valen name." Silence stretched between them, thick and dangerous. Eleanor's jaw worked as she processed the veiled threat, the recognition that Dominic had the resources and connections to make good on it. Finally, she looked at Lyra with something almost like grudging respect. "You have certainly changed," Eleanor said coldly. "The girl Cale brought home would never have stood up to me like this." "That girl does not exist anymore," Lyra said. "You made sure of that." Eleanor turned away, dismissing them with body language, if not words. Dominic guided Lyra out of the study and back toward the reception, his hand steady on her back. As they descended the stairs, Lyra felt tremors run through her, the adrenaline of the confrontation finally catching up. "Breathe," Dominic reminded her gently. They returned to the ballroom just as the cake cutting was announced. Guests gathered around a 5-tier monstrosity decorated with sugar flowers and gold leaf, cameras ready to capture Kyle and Serafina's practiced smiles as they sliced into the expensive confection. Serafina fed Kyle a bite with delicate precision, and he returned the gesture, both of them performing for the crowd with the ease of people who had rehearsed intimacy until it looked natural. But Lyra saw the way Cale's eyes kept drifting toward where she stood with Dominic at the edge of the crowd. Saw the tension in his shoulders, the way his smile faltered when he thought no one was watching. Serafina noticed too, her posture stiffening each time her new husband's attention wandered. The evening wore on with more dancing, more toasts, more performances of wealth and happiness. Lyra danced with Dominic twice more, fielded polite questions from guests who were suddenly interested in her story, and endured the weight of being watched by people who could not reconcile the girl they had dismissed with the woman now standing beside one of the most powerful men in the country. Around 11, Cale's best man called for a final toast. Guests gathered with fresh champagne, and the best man launched into a speech about friendship and loyalty, about Cale and Serafina's perfect match. But midway through, Cale stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the polished floor. "I need to say something," Cale announced, his voice cutting through the music and conversation. The room fell silent. Serafina's smile froze. Eleanor's expression turned thunderous, and Lyra's heart stopped as Cale's gaze locked onto her across the crowded ballroom. I made a mistake, Cale said, his words slightly slurred from champagne and emotion. 3 years ago, I chose safety over truth. I chose what was expected over what I felt, and I have regretted it every single day since. Gasps rippled through the crowd. Serafina stood, her face pale with fury and humiliation. Kyle, stop. You are drunk. I am not drunk enough, Cale replied, moving away from the head table, descending the steps toward the main floor. Lyra, I need you to know that letting you go was the biggest mistake of my life. Seeing you here tonight, seeing what you have become without me, it makes me realize what I threw away. Lyra felt the eyes of 200 guests boring into her, felt the weight of Kyle's confession like a physical thing. Dominic stood slightly behind her, close enough to provide support, but far enough to let her handle this her way. She took a breath, then another, and stepped forward to meet Kyle. When she spoke, her voice was clear and carried across the silent ballroom. You did not make a mistake, Kyle. You made a choice. You chose your family's approval, your inheritance, your position. Those were not wrong choices. They were just not choices that included me. And that is fine. But you do not get to stand here on your wedding day and try to rewrite history because you are uncomfortable with the consequences. Cale's face crumpled. I love you. I never stopped loving you. No, Lyra said firmly. You loved the idea of me. You loved the rebellion I represented, the feeling of breaking your mother's rules. But when it came down to actually choosing me, to building a life that did not fit the Valen blueprint, you could not do it. And the truth is, Cale, I do not think I loved you either. I loved who I thought you were, who you pretended to be. The real you is standing here in a white tuxedo, married to a woman you do not love, making a scene at your own wedding because you cannot handle not being the center of my universe anymore. The silence that followed was absolute. Serafina stood frozen, tears streaming down her carefully made-up face. Eleanor looked like she might shatter from sheer rage, and Cale just stared at Lyra as if seeing her for the first time. I am sorry, Lyra said, and she meant it. I am sorry you are not happy. I am sorry this is not what you wanted. But I am not sorry I moved on. I am not sorry I built a life without you. And I am not sorry I came here tonight, because it proved to me that I am finally free of you. She turned to Dominic. I would like to leave now. He nodded, offering his arm. As they walked toward the exit, the crowd parted silently, and Lyra did not look back. Not at Cale, frozen in the middle of the dance floor. Not at Eleanor, whose world of control had just fractured publicly. Not at the ballroom full of witnesses who would talk about this night for years. She looked forward, toward the doors, toward the cold December air beyond, toward whatever came next. And when they reached Dominic's car and drove away from the Valen estate, Lyra allowed herself to cry, not from pain, but from relief. She had walked into the place designed to destroy her, and she had walked out intact, whole, hers. The nightmare was over. And for the first time in 3 years, Lyra believed the future could be different. The car ride back to Lyra's apartment was quiet, except for the soft hum of the engine and the occasional swish of tires on snow-dusted streets. Chicago passed by in blurs of light and shadow, the city oblivious to the earthquake that had just shaken the foundations of one of its oldest families. Lyra sat with her hands folded in her lap, her midnight blue gown pooled around her feet, feeling both exhausted and strangely energized, as if she had run a marathon and crossed the finish line without collapsing. Dominic did not press her to speak, allowing the silence to be what she needed. When they pulled up to her building in Pilsen, modest and weathered compared to the Gold Coast mansions they had left behind, he walked her to the door despite her protests. "You do not have to," Lyra said. "I know," Dominic replied, "but your mother would have expected me to see you safely home, and I do not break promises to Elena, even now." Inside the apartment, Maya was waiting, still in her scrubs from the hospital, eyes wide with barely contained curiosity and concern. She took one look at Lyra's face and pulled her into a fierce hug. "I have been checking social media for the past 3 hours," Maya said. "Lyra, you are everywhere. There are videos, photos, people are losing their minds. What happened?" Lyra sank onto the couch, suddenly aware of how tired she was. "Cale made a scene. He confessed he still loved me in front of everyone at his own wedding." Maya's jaw dropped. "He what?" Dominic, who had followed them inside, settled into a chair with the ease of someone comfortable in any environment. It was quite the spectacle. Lyra handled it with remarkable grace. Over the next hour, Lyra recounted the evening, from Eleanor's confrontation to Cale's public confession to her final words before walking out. Maya listened with a mixture of pride and shock, occasionally interrupting with exclamations or curses directed at the Valan family. When Lyra finished, Maya shook her head in disbelief. "You are officially my hero," Maya declared, "and Cale Valan is officially the dumbest man alive, who confesses love to their ex at their own wedding. Someone who never learned to sit with discomfort," Dominic observed. "Cale is not accustomed to wanting something he cannot have." Lyra's presence, her success, her ability to move on, it challenged his narrative. He reacted poorly. "That is the understatement of the century," Maya muttered. Then she looked at Dominic with open curiosity. "So what happens now? The internet is speculating about your relationship with Lyra, and some of the theories are wild." Dominic smiled slightly. "Let them speculate. The truth is simpler and more boring than conspiracy theories. I made a promise to Lyra's mother, and I am honoring it. There is no scandal, no secret romance, just an old man keeping his word." "You are not that old," Lyra said automatically. 52 feels ancient when you have spent decades watching people make the same mistakes on repeat," Dominic replied dryly. Then his expression grew more serious. "But Maya raises a valid point. Tomorrow the fallout will begin. The Valan family will attempt damage control. The media will want your story. People will reach out, some genuine, many opportunistic. You need to decide how you want to handle it." Lyra had not thought that far ahead. The wedding had consumed all her focus, and now that it was over, the future felt suddenly vast and uncertain. "I do not want attention. I just want to go back to my life." "I understand," Dominic said, "but I suspect that will be difficult for the next few weeks. However, I can provide resources to help. Security, if needed. Legal support if anyone attempts to harass you. And connections, if you want to leverage this moment into something productive." "Leverage it how?" Lyra asked. Dominic leaned forward. "You stood up to one of Chicago's most powerful families and exposed their hypocrisy. People will remember that. If you wanted to, you could use this platform to advocate for others, to tell stories that need telling. Your work at the community center, your teaching, your background, it all positions you as someone who understands both worlds. That is rare and valuable." The idea was overwhelming and intriguing in equal measure. Lyra had spent 3 years trying to disappear, to build a quiet life where the past did not matter. But maybe Dominic was right. Maybe she could transform this experience into something meaningful, something that helped people like her, people caught between worlds and told they did not belong. "I will think about it," Lyra said. Dominic nodded, standing to leave. "That is all I ask. And Lyra, for what it is worth, your mother would be incredibly proud of you. She faced similar battles, and she would recognize the courage it took to do what you did tonight." After he left, Lyra and Maya sat in comfortable silence for a while. Then Maya said gently, "How are you really feeling?" Not the brave face, the real answer. Lyra considered. "Lighter," she said finally. "Like I have been carrying something heavy for 3 years and I finally set it down. Seeing Kyle tonight, hearing him try to claim me again, it did not hurt the way I thought it would. It just felt sad. Sad for him, sad for Serafina, sad for everyone trapped in that world where appearances matter more than truth." "You are free of him," Maya said. "Yeah," Lyra agreed. "I really am." The next morning arrived with relentless speed. Lyra's phone buzzed continuously, notifications piling up faster than she could dismiss them. Social media was on fire with speculation and commentary. Several videos from the wedding had gone viral: Lyra arriving with Dominic, Kale's public confession, Lyra's response. The clips had been edited, captioned, shared millions of times across platforms, each iteration adding new layers of interpretation. Some people were sympathetic, calling Lyra brave and Kyle selfish. Others were critical, accusing her of ruining his wedding or using Dominic for revenge. A few tabloid sites ran wild with conspiracy theories about secret affairs and hidden agendas. News outlets requested interviews. Random people messaged her with everything from support to threats. Maya helped Lyra turn off most notifications and set her accounts to private. They ordered breakfast from the corner diner and tried to pretend the world outside was not imploding with opinions about Lyra's life. But around noon, Lyra's phone rang with a number she recognized: the community center where she worked. Her supervisor, Mrs. Rodriguez, sounded apologetic, but firm. "Lyra, I am sorry to call on a Sunday, but we have been receiving media calls all morning asking about you. I need you to take some time off until this settles down. We cannot have reporters showing up at the center. It is disruptive to our families." Lyra's stomach sank. "I understand." After hanging up, she sat staring at her phone, feeling the first real tremor of anxiety. She had not considered how public attention might impact her job, her students, the quiet life she had worked so hard to build. Everything felt suddenly fragile, as if last night's triumph had cracked open her carefully constructed world. "It will be okay," Maya said, though her voice carried uncertainty. By evening, the situation escalated further. A sleek black car pulled up outside Lyra's building, and a woman in an expensive suit emerged, carrying a briefcase. She buzzed Lyra's apartment, and when Maya answered the intercom, the woman identified herself as Charlotte Webb, legal counsel for the Valen family. Lyra's hands shook as she buzzed Charlotte up. This was it, the retaliation she had half expected. The Valens were going to threaten her, try to silence her, make her pay for embarrassing them publicly. Charlotte was impeccably professional when she entered, accepting tea, but getting straight to business. "Miss Lyra, I am here on behalf of Eleanor Valen to propose a resolution to last night's unfortunate situation." "Unfortunate," Lyra repeated flatly. Charlotte opened her briefcase and withdrew a document. "Mrs. Valen is prepared to offer you a substantial sum in exchange for your signature on a non-disclosure agreement." You would agree not to speak publicly about your relationship with Kyle Valen, about the events of last evening, or about any interactions with the Valen family. In return, you would receive $500,000, paid immediately. The number hung in the air, staggering and insulting simultaneously. $500,000 to disappear again, to pretend none of this happened, to let the Valens control the narrative. "And if I refuse?" Lyra asked. Charlotte's expression remained neutral. "Then the Valen family will pursue all legal avenues to protect their reputation. They have significant resources and are prepared to make your life quite difficult." Maya stood up, anger flashing in her eyes. "You are threatening her?" "I am informing her of consequences," Charlotte corrected. "Miss Lyra, you do not have the resources to fight a prolonged legal battle. This offer is generous. I suggest you consider it seriously." Lyra looked at the document, at the zeros on the check paperclipped to the contract, at the carefully worded clauses designed to erase her voice. 3 years ago, she might have taken it. 3 years ago, she would have seen it as validation, as worth, as a way out. But she was not that girl anymore. "No," Lyra said clearly. "Tell Mrs. Valen that my story is mine to tell, or not tell as I choose. She does not get to buy my silence." Charlotte's professional mask slipped slightly, showing surprise. "Miss Lyra, I strongly advise you to reconsider. The Valen family does not make threats lightly." "Neither do I," Lyra replied. "You can leave now." Charlotte gathered her materials with crisp efficiency, her disapproval evident. "You are making a mistake." "Then it is my mistake to make," Lyra said. After Charlotte left, Lyra collapsed onto the couch, adrenaline making her hands tremble. Maya sat beside her, gripping her shoulder. "That was incredible and terrifying," Maya said. "Are you sure about this?" "No," Lyra admitted, "but I am sure I will not let them silence me again. I already disappeared once for them. Never again." She called Dominic, relaying the conversation. His response was immediate and firm. "They are testing you, trying to see if you will fold under pressure. I will have my legal team review their options, ensure they cannot fabricate claims against you. And Lyra, if you want to tell your story, truly tell it. I can connect you with journalists who will handle it ethically." "I do not know what I want yet," Lyra said honestly. "Then take your time deciding," Dominic replied. "But know that you are not alone in this. Whatever you choose, I will support you." That night, Lyra lay awake, staring at the ceiling, thinking about choices and consequences. Somewhere across the city, Kyle was presumably dealing with his own fallout, his marriage likely strained beyond repair, his mother furious, his reputation damaged. She felt no satisfaction in his pain, only a kind of sad acceptance that some things could not be undone. But she also thought about the messages flooding her social media, the ones she had glimpsed before going private. Messages from women who saw themselves in her story, who had been told they were not enough, who had walked away from relationships that diminished them. Messages thanking her for standing up, for showing that dignity mattered more than wealth, that self-respect was worth more than acceptance by people who would never truly value you. Maybe Dominic was right. Maybe this moment could become something larger, something meaningful. Not revenge against the Valens, but a genuine effort to change the conversation about worth and belonging, about who gets to define success and happiness. As sleep finally claimed her, Lyra made a decision. She would not hide. She would not let the Valens dictate her narrative. But she would also not let this become about them. If she was going to speak, It would be to tell her own story, to advocate for others, to build something that mattered. The battle was not over. But for the first time, Lyra believed she could win it on her own terms. If this story is touching your heart, please take a moment to subscribe to our channel and hit the notification bell so you don't miss the final chapters. And we'd love to hear from you in the comments. What has been your favorite moment in Lyra's journey so far? Your engagement helps us continue bringing stories that matter. 3 weeks after the wedding, Chicago was locked in winter's deepest grip, the city dressed in ice and gray skies that turned afternoon into premature evening. Lyra stood at the window of a coffee shop in Logan Square, warming her hands on a mug of tea, watching people hurry past in heavy coats and scarves. The shop was quiet on this weekday afternoon, just a few scattered patrons working on laptops or reading. The kind of anonymous space she had come to appreciate in the aftermath of her newfound visibility. She had turned down every interview request, declined every talk show invitation, ignored the increasingly desperate emails from producers wanting to tell her story. Instead, she had spent these weeks thinking, writing, and figuring out who she wanted to be now that the chapter with Kale was definitively closed. The community center had welcomed her back after the initial frenzy died down, though Mrs. Rodriguez had gently suggested Lyra might consider more flexible hours to avoid media attention affecting their families. Dominic had checked in regularly, offering support without pressure, providing legal protection when a particularly aggressive tabloid attempted to fabricate a scandal. His team had quietly ensured that the Valian family's threatened legal action never materialized, making clear that any attempt to harass Lyra would be met with resources that far exceeded what Eleanor could muster. The Cold War had settled into a tense truce, each side maintaining distance while the gossip slowly shifted to other scandals, other dramas. But Lyra had not been idle. She had started writing, really writing, putting her experience into words not for catharsis but for clarity. The essay that emerged was not about Kale or the Valen specifically, but about class, about belonging, about the ways society tells certain people they are not enough, and how those messages burrow deep enough to feel like truth. She had sent it to a friend of Dominic's who edited for a prominent online publication, expecting rejection or heavy editing. Instead, the editor had called her personally. "This is powerful. We want to run it exactly as written. Are you prepared for the response?" Lyra had said yes, though she was not sure she was. The essay published on a Tuesday morning, and within hours, it was everywhere. Shared tens of thousands of times, discussed on social media, quoted in think pieces about wealth inequality and social mobility. People messaged her their own stories, some heartbreaking, some triumphant, all echoing variations of the same theme. I thought I was the only one who felt this way. Now, standing in this coffee shop 3 weeks later, Lyra was meeting someone who had reached out after reading the essay. Dr. Sarah Chen, a sociologist at Northwestern who studied class dynamics and social hierarchies, had proposed a collaboration. A research project examining the real-world impacts of class prejudice on relationships and self-worth, using interviews and data to document what Lyra had lived through. "The stories need to be told," Dr. Chen had written. "And you have a unique perspective, someone who has navigated both worlds and survived. If you are interested, I think we could do meaningful work together." The door chimed, and a woman in her 40s entered, scanning the room until her eyes landed on Lyra. She smiled, genuine and warm, and crossed to Lyra's table. "Lyra, I am Sarah Chen. Thank you for meeting me." They settled into conversation easily, Dr. Chen explaining her research with infectious enthusiasm, outlining how Lyra's participation could help shape a broader understanding of class and belonging. Lyra found herself engaged, excited even, at the prospect of transforming her pain into something that could help others. I cannot promise it will be easy, Dr. Chen cautioned. Revisiting trauma for research purposes is demanding, but if you are willing, I believe we can produce work that genuinely matters. I am willing, Lyra said, and she meant it. As they discussed logistics and timelines, Lyra's phone buzzed with a text. She glanced down, expecting Maya or Dominic, but the name made her freeze. Cale Valen. The message was simple. Can we talk? Please. Lyra stared at the words, her first instinct to delete and block. She had no obligation to Cale, no reason to reopen communication. But curiosity and perhaps a lingering thread of something, not love, but shared history, made her hesitate. Is everything okay? Dr. Chen asked, noticing Lyra's expression. Yes, sorry, Lyra said, turning her phone face down. Just unexpected contact from someone I would rather not deal with. Dr. Chen nodded knowingly. The past has a way of demanding attention even when we are trying to move forward. But remember, you control the terms now. You do not owe anyone access to you. The affirmation settled something in Lyra. After Dr. Chen left, promising to send project details by email, Lyra sat with her phone, considering. She could ignore Cale. She could block him. Or she could respond on her own terms, not as the girl he had discarded, but as the woman she had become. She typed, I will meet you. Once. Public place. Tomorrow at 2 p.m. Millennium Park, near the Bean. His response came immediately. Thank you. I will be there. That night, Lyra told Maya and Dominic about the planned meeting. Maya was skeptical, worried this was Cale trying to manipulate Lyra again. Dominic was more measured. If you want to meet him, that is your choice, Dominic said over the phone. But go in with clear boundaries. You do not owe him forgiveness, reconciliation, or anything beyond the conversation you are willing to have. And if at any point you want to leave, you leave. The next afternoon, Lyra arrived at Millennium Park bundled against the cold, the iconic Cloud Gate sculpture reflecting the gray sky, and the handful of tourists brave enough to venture out. Cale was already there, standing apart from others, looking diminished somehow in his expensive wool coat. His face was drawn, evidence of stress or sleepless nights, and when he saw Lyra, his expression crumbled into something vulnerable and desperate. Lyra, thank you for coming. I was not sure you would. I almost did not, Lyra admitted, maintaining physical distance between them. What do you want, Cale? He took a breath, struggling with words. I wanted to apologize. Truly apologize. Not the half-hearted sorry I texted 3 years ago. What I did to you, what my family did, it was cruel and cowardly. You deserved better, and I was too weak to fight for you. You are right, Lyra said simply. I did deserve better. Kyle flinched but continued. My marriage is over. Serafina filed for annulment 2 weeks ago, citing my confession at the wedding as evidence I entered the marriage under false pretenses. My mother is furious. The family reputation is damaged, and I have spent every day since that night realizing I threw away the only real thing I ever had. Lyra felt no triumph in his pain, only a sad recognition of consequences playing out. I am sorry your marriage failed. But Kyle, you cannot be here hoping to win me back. That is not possible. I know, he said quickly. I know I destroyed what we had. I needed you to know that I see it now. I see what I did, how I hurt you, how I let my family dictate my choices. And I needed to tell you that you were right. At the wedding, when you said I never really loved you, just the idea of you, you were right. I was in love with rebellion, with breaking my mother's rules, and I used you for that without ever considering the cost to you." The admission landed with unexpected weight. Lyra had suspected this truth for years, but hearing Cale acknowledge it brought a kind of closure she had not known she needed. "Thank you for saying that," Lyra said. "It does not change anything, but it helps." They stood in silence for a moment, watching tourists take selfies in the bean's reflective surface, oblivious to the emotional reckoning happening nearby. Then Cale asked, "Are you happy now? With your life?" Lyra considered the question honestly. "I am getting there. I have work that matters to me, friends who support me, opportunities I never imagined. It is not the life I thought I wanted when I was with you, but it is mine, and that matters more than I can explain." "And Dominic Kane?" Cale asked, unable to hide the thread of jealousy. "Is a friend and mentor who has shown me what actual support looks like," Lyra replied firmly. "There is nothing romantic between us, but even if there were, it would not be your business. You made your choice, Kyle. You chose your family, your inheritance, your comfortable life. I respect that choice now, even if it hurt me then. But you do not get to question mine." Cale nodded, defeat written across his features. "I just want you to be happy." "Then let me go," Lyra said gently. "Really let me go. Stop texting, stop showing up, stop trying to rewrite history. What we had is over. Make peace with that." "I do not know if I can," Cale admitted, his voice breaking. "Then that is your work to do," Lyra said. "But you have to do it without me." She turned to leave, and Cale called after her. "Lyra, wait. I still love you." Lyra paused, but did not turn around. "No, you do not. You love the idea of me, the version of me you built in your head to justify your regret. But you do not know the real me anymore. I am not sure you ever did." She walked away then, her boots crunching on snow-dusted pavement, and she did not look back. Behind her, Kyle stood alone in the shadow of the bean, and Lyra felt the final thread connecting them snap cleanly. It hurt, in the way healing sometimes does, but it was the right pain, the necessary kind. Over the following months, Lyra's life took on new shape and purpose. She threw herself into Dr. Chen's research project, conducting interviews with people who had experienced similar class-based rejection, finding patterns and insights that affirmed her own experience while illuminating broader systemic issues. The work was challenging and deeply personal, but it felt important in ways her previous jobs never had. Dominic continued to be a steady presence, offering guidance without overstepping, connecting Lyra with people who could expand her opportunities. Through him, she was invited to speak on a panel about social mobility at a university conference, her first public appearance since the essay. She was terrified, but Maya helped her prepare, and when Lyra stood before an audience sharing her story, she found strength in the faces looking back at her, people nodding in recognition, understanding. The community center work remained her anchor, teaching English to families navigating the same cultural gaps she understood intimately. But now she also consulted with organizations working on social equity, using her experience to inform policy recommendations and program design. Her calendar filled with purpose, each day a choice to build rather than hide. 6 months after the wedding, Lyra received an invitation to another event, this one from Dominic, a charity gala benefiting immigrant support organizations, black tie, at one of Chicago's historic hotels. She almost declined, wary of returning to that world, but Dominic insisted. "This is your community now," he said. "People who do work that matters, not people who collect status like trophies. I think you will be surprised." He was right. The gala was different from the Valen wedding in every meaningful way. Yes, there was wealth in the room, but it was wielded toward purpose, toward causes that helped real people. Lyra met activists and nonprofit leaders, tech entrepreneurs funding education initiatives, artists using their platforms for social change. Conversations were substantive, focused on solutions rather than appearances. And when Dominic introduced her to people, he did not frame her as the girl who embarrassed the Valens. He introduced her as a colleague, a researcher, someone whose insights were valuable. Lyra felt herself relaxing into this environment, finding her voice in discussions about policy and impact. Near the end of the evening, as the band played and couples danced, Dominic offered his hand. "May I?" Lyra smiled and accepted, and they moved onto the dance floor. As they swayed to the music, Dominic said quietly, "Your mother would be so proud of who you have become." Tears pricked Lyra's eyes, but they were good tears, the kind that released rather than trapped. "I wish she could have met you, known you were looking out for me." "I think she knew," Dominic replied. Elena had a way of seeing things others missed. She saw potential in people, possibility. You have that same gift, Lyra. Do not waste it. As the song ended, Lyra realized she was not just surviving anymore. She was thriving, building a life that honored everything she had endured while refusing to be defined by it. The girl who had walked into the Valen wedding had been seeking validation, proof she was more than they said. But the woman dancing in this ballroom knew her worth did not require external confirmation. Later that night, back in her apartment with Maya, Lyra checked her social media, something she did rarely now. There was a message from someone she did not recognize, a young woman named Jasmine who had read Lyra's essay. "I just wanted to say thank you. I was in a relationship with someone whose family made me feel worthless because I came from nothing. I stayed because I thought their approval would make me whole. Your story helped me see I was already whole, and I left. It is hard, but I am building my own life now. Thank you for showing me it was possible." Lyra read the message twice, then 3 times, each word affirming the choice to share her story. She responded with encouragement, then set her phone down and looked around her small apartment, at the life she had built from broken pieces. This was not the ending she had imagined when she first loved Cale Valen. It was better, because it was hers, earned through pain and courage, built on foundations she controlled. The fairy tale had turned out to be a different story entirely, one about finding yourself rather than being found, about standing up rather than being lifted up, about claiming worth that was always there, just waiting to be recognized. And as Lyra fell asleep that night, she did so with peace she had not felt in years, knowing that tomorrow held possibility, that her story was still being written, and that the best chapters were still ahead. The Alpha King had walked beside her long enough to remind her she could stand alone. And now, standing alone did not feel lonely. It felt like freedom. Thank you so much for following Lyra's journey from beginning to end. If this story moved you, inspired you, or made you think differently about worth, belonging, and courage, please subscribe to our channel to support more stories like this. We'd love to hear your final thoughts in the comments. What was your favorite moment? Which part resonated most with you? Your engagement helps us continue creating meaningful content. Until the next story, remember that your worth is inherent, your voice matters, and you deserve relationships that celebrate rather than diminish you. Thank you for being here.